because not every tutor is familiar with Paul's studio. And after Paul's brief introduction, we can invite Huzefah to present her project. Hello, Huzefah, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. It's been a long time.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll just quickly present the studio's kind of agenda, like what do we initially seek out to achieve and what things have evolved in the process of doing it. So sorry. So this is we are DR00. You guys can see the page, right?
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, and the title is Prototyping Spatial Negotiation. So basically, we're dealing with problems of the cities. So one of the definitely the most straightforward problem is cities are becoming denser. So this is this is a population problem in New York, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, in Dharavi, India, in Karachi, Pakistan, as well as in Bogota, Colombia. Like these are the few of the most densest cities in the world. So you can see like the houses are very closely located, and then it's just like a very close-knit of network. And with this dense population of cities, what are the implications? The problems with traffic congestions, the housing problems where because of the demand of housings, the housing prices are driven really high, and then people can't afford to even purchase or live in a very comfortable space. People are forced to kind of like squeeze in small spaces, as you can see here. So for us, the studio begins with basically looking at the problem. So first of all, we want to discuss what's the problem that we face within the cities. And then we will discuss what are challenges that will happen within the cities regarding the space, and finally propose a spatial negotiation. So in the first place, we really want to look at the dense city problems. But as we step to kind of like taking a more customized approach with the students with Huzefah, we began to discover that in her own country, the problems that we're dealing with is slightly different, maybe. And then the project starts to evolve. We start to re-identify the problems with the city, and then propose methods and strategies to negotiate with the space. Yeah, and then with this, I'll lift the presentation to Huzefah. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I am Huzefah. I was part of Paul and Clark's spatial negotiations prototypes. As we started the course, I reside in Karachi, Pakistan. So it is one of the densest city, as Paul has mentioned. When we started overall, we studied the overall city and its density along with its problem. So in the multiple problems, what stuck and what stood out was the recent monsoon rains that happened in 2019, which sort of changed the entire landscape and the fabric of the city, and how streets and residential scheme was sort of interacted with. It somehow stopped and barricaded the access from residentials on the street, because all the streets and the roads were sort of flooded with water for quite some time. So one of these areas is Ner Khayyam. The other important factor to know about this area is that this area is near the sea. The other reason why this was a more important factor to sort of consider was the fact that the rising sea levels around the Karachi seashore are sort of concerning, because in 10 years the sea level would rise to about 1 meter, would rise to a level where the city of its adjoining areas, such as Defense and Clifton, would actually submerge in the water by 1 meter. So this is one of the areas. This is the red spot sort of indicates where the hair is. This was initially for natural fresh, it was a natural drain which sort of goes into the sea. But eventually it sort of started getting dumped by sewage water. There was a project in 2018, which was held by various architects to sort of revamp this entire strip of the stream, to box the entire sewage drainage into a box drain and leave this as the fresh water where public interactions can happen. So this is the current condition of the Nehar and the stream of the entire strip. It's a 1 kilometer strip where different multifunctional residential and commercial architecture typologies happen around, both on parallel, running parallel to the entire length of the stream. This is sort of the elevation and the elevation scape of the entire 1 kilometer strip. These are some of the housing typologies and as well as commercial buildings. So the entire strip is a mixed use where there's residential as well as commercial activities happening on this entire strip of areas. These are some of the studies done from a website which sort of analyzes the rising sea levels and an impact on various cities and sea levels, and how the climate change is sort of impacting it. So this is the entire Nehar Street, and it shows how if the water level rises by 1 meter, what part of those areas would be submerged in water. This is the submerged area that will happen if the water level rises by 2 meters, and this is by 5. This is the land that would be below sea level in the next 9 years, 8 now. This is an image which shows the condition of this area, which happened in 2019 during the monsoon. So this entire strip was sort of submerged in water by approximately 1 meter. These are some of the sections. The purple water sort of indicates the overflowing of the Nehar, and the green thin line sort of shows what happens, the level of the sea level if it rises in the next 10 years. This area sort of blown up to show the activities that happen in this section. This is a commercial activity building where the water sort of, in each of the cases, what happens is that the water actually overflows into the buildings. So in all of these sectional studies, it was identified that there were 2 aspects that were happening. One, the housing typology, the ground floor in the housing typology became completely inaccessible. At the same time, the overflowing of the stream within the center of this entire streetscape sort of overflew, which made which blocked the access to these areas. This is the existing condition, an axo of how the existing condition sort of changes as monsoon happens. So as the monsoon as it starts raining, the water level within the channel sort of starts rising. Also because all the water that sort of gets accumulated within the building areas and the road gets sort of collected within the central stream. As it keeps raining, the Nehar gets completely filled and the water sort of overflows within the roads and the private properties. And this is sort of to the point where things become immobile and inaccessible. So in order to gauge and identify what can be done, there were 2 interventions. The interventions and the possible solutions are sort of divided into 2 aspects. One was the landscape aspect. Further, the landscape aspect was sort of explored in different ways, and how one can sort of look at possible situations where this can be redone in a way which sort of acts as a point where public interaction with the water remains, but at the same time, it also acts as a protective barrier for any water that overflows. So this is the existing condition. These are multiple ways that one can sort of block the water from overflowing into the road, the landscape, and the private property. So a hard boundary is something that can be made. The other are variations of how landscape can be sort of a softer boundary where landscape can sort of change levels in a way that it sort of creates this constant interaction with the water, but at the same time, it keeps the water at bay. So I sort of picked the soft boundary element to develop the iteration of the landscape intervention. These were sort of this is sort of the active analysis of how the water, if it keeps rising, how it gets blocked, but at the same time on each level as the land sort of recedes and the water sort of overcomes it, there's still this retention of public interaction that remains. But at the same time, this water doesn't overflow to other areas of the street. The second intervention that was identified was the housing typology and how that can be sort of redesigned or rethought of in order to keep it accessible. So while the monsoon condition is temporary, rising sea levels are something that still need to be thought of, and how it can still remain accessible at the same time the ground floor level can be used. So this was an understanding of how a mass can be broken into structure and volumes, and how circulation can be sort of separated from it, where the circulation becomes sort of like scaffolding, which can sort of be flexible enough for it to change with the times, and functionality can sort of be added to it. So it's a plug-in system where volumes can also come in according to the requirement. So let's say if half of that entire square feet is needed, it can be sort of plonked in. 1/4 of the space can also be used, and the full floor can also be used. So this was an understanding of how the housing typology can be sort of thought of. This is the entire strip sort of taken into consideration, where multiple levels of interventions can happen, which can sort of deal with the changing situations of the city. The highlighted ones are the interventions that are sort of introduced. This is the landscape area, which sort of divides, creates a height barrier, but at the same time creates a landscape intervention for the public to interact with the water, as well as for the dry land. At the same time, the housing typology, the hard boundary between the housing typology and the road is sort of made into a softer boundary. But at the same time, housing typology itself has been identified, with the roof being the one factor that can be explored in terms of if we lose out on the ground floor function, can the roof be something that can be activated to perform the function that the ground floor is performing? At the same time, a lot of water, because there is no rainwater collection happening, a lot of water gets accumulated and gets wasted by it sort of collecting within the central stream. So maybe some kind of storage can sort of come in within the housing typologies to reuse that fresh water. These are some of the, this is again, we're sort of seeing how the city sort of starts interacting when the monsoon comes in. So the water starts getting stored. Whatever is being collected does not accumulate within the central stream, but they have their own individual storage tanks. So for example, the housing typology, all the water that is accumulated from the roof and other levels sort of gets collected within this tank, and the water from here. At the same time, as the water level rises, this still remains contained. At the same time, while on the existing condition, the water level is rising faster because all the road, the water the rainwater that gets thrown into the road and the building gets accumulated here within the stream. So these are just some activated areas further zoomed in. Then how the water keeps rising as the monsoon happens. This is where the storage tank sort of overflows, but at the same time, this water starts getting over the landscape slope that's there. While on the existing condition, if these interventions weren't there, the road and the private areas would still be inaccessible. So this is again some this is one of the last final resort for the monsoon. So in case the road also gets overflown, there can be a very again, the scaffolding system can come in where a sky bridge or a walkway can be made, whereas a monsoon emergency barriers can be blocked for the road water to not come in into the property areas. This is an overall strategy. So with changing time, the interventions need to be such that they can allow for changes and flexibility to happen over time. So all of these highlighted areas, such as the pier, is sort of introduced in larger forms of steps, which can sort of act as platforms for the boats to come in eventually at different levels of water as it rises. At the same time, these areas, which are the foundation supports for street lamps and posts, can alternatively act as seating elements in a dry land situation, and the landscape sort of acts as an interactive element. As further situation changes in monsoon, again, the emergency barriers can come in and those get activated. Once the sea level rises, a lot more long-term situation is needed. So the roads and the sky bridges sort of become an elevated area where interaction can stay, while the mode of transportation primarily now becomes boats. And this staggered pier sort of acts as a platform for people to still let the building be accessible. This was a further intervention where how can one also keep the ground level accessible to some limit. So what can be those mechanisms which can sort of lift the floor level as the water sort of comes in. So these were the sort of interventions that sort of thought of. This is the housing typology sort of comes in where the roof gets activated again. This flexible vertical structure sort of becomes this area which becomes like a vertical streetscape. This is a comparative of how the dry situation sort of comes in when how it changes as the sea level rises, and how here the ground floor sort of sort of gets lifted as the sea level rises for it to remain accessible, where this pier gets submerged, but there's still this platform which can be accessed by boats. Then this is the water collection system, where it sort of gets stored in the tank underneath. This is further highlighting how the circulation happens, where these extended enlarged platforms sort of act as vertical streetscape and markets. This is the overall sort of scheme, which shows the proposed current condition within a dry situation. What happens when the monsoon sort of comes in and the rainwater sort of gets accumulated, and how the entire fabric in the cityscape sort of changes as the sea level rises. So this is the research that's been done so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.
Yeah, great project.
Great presentation.
Yeah. So basically, what we say is like, because I think this is more like a research project that we've chosen. So we began with almost trying to identify like a very local problem within Karachi, where Huzefah lives in, and then slowly try to narrow down the landscape until we've decided to just focus on one section strip, where you cannot interact with the water and with a bit of housing, to really just focus our attention on the design. And then I guess there's also two approaches that we've seen here, right? Like one is the more kind of like framework, like landscape part, where we design how the bigger landscape interacts with the changing of sea level, basically. And then the other portion is the more kind of like focused portion where how the residential component is also a flexible kind of like system where it really deals with the kind of like basically unforeseeable changes in this kind of like changing future. Yeah, and how like at the moment I think we've really kind of set up the framework for the research where like each and every portion can be focused on further. Yeah, to go into more details to resolve like what is the kind of like details where we talk about flexible architecture or flexible structure, how things can kind of like interact with each other. Yeah, I think that was our kind of like research framework and goal.
Let's see if any other tutor have comments. I have some questions for you, but I can wait to the end.
I have some questions as well, but I'm sure you have looked at it. So have you guys also studied floating structures? So structures that will float when the water comes in. They're smaller scale, but it's anchored to the ground. So I when I look at this, I think that there is an opportunity to fit in floating structures like mini pots on the ground floors, where wherever there's an emergency, you can sort of unplug it out of the superstructure, and then it becomes like a floating ground floor room. I'm not sure if that's completely viable. I'm looking at the structure and the interior as like two separate things where they could be slot into it, and where there's flooding, you empty the ground floor and then let it flood, because it's very hard to fight the flood with water tanks and just barriers. Might be adapting to the kind of flood might be also another alternative. Yeah, just throwing in some ideas. I think this study is very nice, and all the sections is very clear. And also the diagram about the map, like 1 meter, 2 meter, 5 meters, is very powerful for showing the narrative. Yeah, I feel like there could be other alternative ways of sort of vacating the ground floor in a way, and then maybe through a bit more water protection around the building for each of the floors. And for example, every year the water level rises, you adjust the buildings so that more of those units can be more flexible pots, which you could sort of extract from outside of the building.
I think the idea of floating is really interesting, and it reminds me of this. I think it's called Amphibian House. It's somewhere in the UK where basically what they did is they have set up like a set of structural framework, and then the dwelling spaces inside is sort of foldable. So when the water comes in, the whole spaces can actually fold up. So the framework provide almost like an anchoring system to the building itself. And I think also like your drawing almost just reminds me of that, where you have all these frameworks. I know you sort of it's almost like an exploded axonometric where you source the interior and all that. But I think what if, the proposal is actually you have all these frameworks, and then all the floor plates can actually be foldable according to the, the sea level or the water level in the city. That might be quite interesting. And also I just have
what do you mean by did you say foldable?
Floatable.
Floatable. Right.
Yeah, sorry. And then just also a few questions. So I think, I think the presentation is really clear. I I got the idea, and I think the drawing is pretty clear as well. But I think what might be quite, or maybe you have it in the beginning, which I might have missed it, but maybe it's some like data of, for example, like how high will the sea level will be, like the water level will be when it's flooded. Maybe you got it already, yeah. And then the other thing is, so let's say if you have all these buildings, which almost serve as a like a water tank for the water to come in. I know you are just focusing on like one stretch of area, but I think it might be also good to look at maybe like a whole area of the city as a whole, and to just study, okay, if all these buildings becomes a water tank, when the monsoon actually comes, can you actually absorb all the water? You don't have to design everything for the city, but it would be good to just have a number to see, how plausible is the scheme is. And then I think also the idea of time as well, because you mentioned, monsoon, which only comes maybe in the summer or something. So what happens to the landscape when, it's not flooded, how people used it? Do you have to do anything to prepare for it? And also, even with, I'm sure like you might be aware of the, global warming and sea level rise. So what happens, let's say in 50 years time, when the water level actually becomes much higher, how does the city prepare for that? So I think this kind of questions can actually bring more, design proposal to the project. And I think it would be also nice to, I know you, again, I know you're sort of focusing on this specific stretch of area, but I think it would be quite nice to actually see the whole, stretch of river and how this landscape actually merge into the water, and how you can actually, is that part of the landscape where you actually allow the water to come in and become part of the landscape as well, so yeah, I think that's my comment. It almost, and again, also the platforms that I think it's in the very end of the presentation, where you have these little platforms allow people to walk on. Yeah, I think I actually think this is really beautiful, and almost reminds me of Venice, when Venice is flooded, and then basically you can see people actually starting to rush out to the sea, to the city, and start to get this platform to bring them in place. Because when it's flooded, people have to actually walk on those platforms, and it's quite interesting because all those platforms, they're actually quite narrow, and it almost only allowed 2 persons to walk, by each other at the same time. And then sometimes when you see tourists holding like a suitcase, they can't walk past it. So one of the person can have to actually go down to the water and come back up again. So I think this like little nuance of moments is quite interesting as well. So I think the idea is also, even like the width of the platform, how wide do you think this platform will have to be? What determined that? I think that would be quite interesting to see. So I think in a way, like there's a lot of different details you can actually add on to the design to make it, even more, precise and rich. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say overall it's a very nice project, and it would benefit from more proposed alternatives. So where you have one solution for these problems, and I think you could suggest a few more to make the project even better. And it's also taking on a very real social problem, and I would almost package this into a proposal where you can send it to your local government, and maybe they can study and do something about it. And I think you have all the research work to back it up, which could be very useful.
Yes. Sorry, I just have one more thing to add. I think might also worth looking into the idea of, because essentially you are talking about living with water. And I think the other question is, how do you actually prepare people to live with water? You know, there's a sense of aquatic living, and it has been like an ongoing discussion in, you know, whether it's architecture or urban planning, because, you know, we are saying, okay, in the future, when water level rise, a lot of the city is going to be flooded. And then even if we have all these sort of proposal or schemes to actually allow us to, you know, live with water, but how exactly are we going to, you know, adapt our lifestyle to it? So I think this is almost like another dimension of, you know, how you can actually prepare the citizen to live with it. So, you know, it might actually present you a lot of different possibilities. For example, you know, you might actually have, you know, almost like I don't know, like urban farm with, you know, water coming in. You can actually, you know, the nutrition, the food choices might be different because of the water. So I would love to see how this will affect the lifestyle of your city as well, of the people. And I think that can tie back to, you know, when Paul, you talk about the spatial negotiation and you talk about the density and everything. So I think, you know, that can be quite a nice narrative to actually tie that back into the city life and the density, because it would change the density as well, because you actually lose, you know, lands and you know, basically becomes more compact.
Yeah, exactly. I think I have the same opinion. So that's what I was just want to say. So you have this monsoon season. So you have this seasonal alternating like conditions, weather conditions that you need to face, right? So in order to make this sustainable, you don't want to just I mean, the first step, you want to just avoid the water flood to get into your building, right? And what's the next step? So you need to adapt this whole seasonal like water feature. So it could be very nice. So the lifestyle could be very, very, very different from where you live with just a little canal in the middle. It can be more like a water life. So I think there's a lot of studies in right now. So people like they actually predict that human could be like in the future could be living in the ocean, right? So this is something that's you can get inspired from, and you actually can introduce a lot of like water style living, like maybe you in a canal you can plant some like water farm, and also you can I can already see you have this little boat things that's going across the city, and that's very nice. And the building could be floating, could be even under the water if the water is not in, or if the water is in, maybe just the furniture goes up or something. Well, you can address this with a lot of different approach. I would say you can do kinetic or other different features. So I would say it's a very nice project. You can go further with these rest several weeks, and then let's see. Okay, nice.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a few comments for I think could really help tie this project. So the first thing is that the whole project reads as like a feasibility study. So you've got all of these different options. And I think it was Ben who was suggesting, like, this could be a document that you put together and give it to your local municipality and say, hey, these are some potential ways we think that you could start to address this problem. So the first thing that I would do is I would be very clear at the beginning of your presentation that it's a research project and that the project is populated with many different options. Because otherwise, after the first 2 or 3 options, we start to get a little bit confused as to what it is we should be focusing on. But if you very clearly say it's a sequence of options, then bang, it makes complete sense. So it reads as a feasibility study. Then importantly, what they do in a feasibility study at the end of it is they kind of lean towards not presenting the best option, but like, of all the options we could think of, this one is, the most cost efficient. This one is the safest, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. You can come up with your own categories. But what I think you do, and I think is missing from this project, is fundamentally, you have 2 options when it comes to the water. You can either accommodate it or you can combat it. So all of the work, all the options that you've done right now are accommodating the water. You're sitting above it, you're creating barriers, et cetera, et cetera. So all of the accommodation work is there, and I think it's perfect. But I think you could also then start to suggest how you can combat it. So how do we even stop the flooding altogether? And you could present some options. So one thing that has stuck in my mind since the beginning of your presentation is the current condition of the, I wouldn't call it a river or anything because it's barren right now, right? There's no water in it. Yep. So one thing that you could suggest—
there's a sewage backlog that's sort of accumulated here.
Exactly. So your narrative would be, okay, when it floods, all of the water that rises into our streets, it's not clean water. It's basically sewage water, right? It's mixing with everything. It becomes black water and it floods our streets. But how do we stop it from flooding our streets? And the current condition of of this channel, you could start to suggest a way of combating it is using sponge city theory. So basically, if you start to populate this as like a green finger with lots of different foliage and plantations that, depending on your research, you might find that they have both water absorption qualities, but also water purification qualities, so that if any water does manage to spill out into the street, it's not going to be completely chemicaled black water. It might have some water purification properties. And then that's a way of combating it. But you set up the whole project to say, this little green thing that we've put here, it's not going to save the whole of the planet, but it will, for this area, this 1 kilometer area, potentially be enough to stop flooding there. And that could be an option for how you could combat the flooding, as opposed to just accommodating it. And then you find all of the options that you have done where you think that it combats the water, and you put it into a separate section. So you open up your presentation by saying it's a feasibility study filled with options. You can either accommodate it, and these are the options, or you can combat it, and these are the options. And then I think you have a great rounded project.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a very—
I'm sorry, I just forgot to mention that for the sewage water, box drains have been introduced here. So all the sewage water doesn't get collected within the central stream, so that it's only filled with clean water. And all the sewage water sort of gets channeled within a proper system, which right now is lacking. So I forgot to mention that, sorry.
But there you go. So already you open up the discussion by saying these systems already exist, but they're not super functional. So one thing that we could do is, X, Y, Z. And therefore, the systems you put into place are not completely redundant, but they need support. That's what I think. Okay. I think if you go back to the photos that you showed at the very beginning, you can't ignore the fact that the current condition is as it is. That's the current condition. Depending on the level of flooding from year to year, and it's only for 1 month or 2 months of the monsoon season, however long it is, you could start to play with other alternative options. And like the rest of the tutors were saying, maybe the interactions change from year to year. So yeah, I think it's a great project. I would lean into the fact that it reads as a feasibility study.
Okay.
Yeah, I do agree. It's a very good project with solid research and solution proposed, and it's like Alan said, it's very, very close to being a complete feasibility study and almost like a proposal how they could tackle flooding. And I think to make it even better, you need more alternative solutions. And what Alan suggested, Sponge City, it does makes a lot of sense because plants take a lot of water. They just absorb that naturally, and they sort of level out the kind of flooding a bit. And I also want to dispel a point, Ivan's point earlier, where you should have more data to support this to make it even better as a feasibility study. So there's data like global sea level rises by 3 to 4 mm per year. Oh, I just Googled this. And you could have this as a number where you sort of have to account every 250 years, all the water level covers up by 1 meter. And during monsoon seasons, it's way worse. And you could almost take the whole area of the country and times the water level changes, and you get the volume of the water and seeing how much of these water tank you will need. And so right now I can see it's almost like building a bucket around and inside of this country. And I think there are problems that comes with this solution. It's a long-term solution which works for maybe a few hundred years, but as time goes on in a super macro scale, it becomes like a giant hole in the ground when you have to build on more and more water barrier at the side of the country. And I think the other way of looking at this is looking at it in reverse by adding more floors on top of the buildings and stuffing the ground floor. So before the water flood the city, you almost cover up the ground level of the city. You flood it with soil, and then you raise the floor level of the country by 1 story, and then you reinforce it, and then you add loads of green on the ground floor, and you have a strong structure where you can build higher. So it's almost like building another layer of the city on top by shifting the ground floor of the whole country by maybe 1 meter or 2 meters, and then slowly ease out the existing ground floor, and the existing first floor turns into the existing ground floor.
So I have a question regarding this comment. If let's say the overall sea level of Karachi from the sea is not that high, especially within this region, especially within the immediate land which is connected with the seashore. What's happened in recent development years has been that the developers have reclaimed land where they've added land where it wasn't. So they've sort of brought in islands where there was sea, which has sort of created even more chances of it getting flooded sooner than it will probably without it. And this is also something that I was sort of debating when we were sort of having, and this also came in discussion, how much of the areas can we actually increase the level? Because on a larger city level, wouldn't it be a lot costlier to actually increase the ground level from the sea?
Yeah.
So in that manner, it became a lot more feasible for us to consider actually accommodating the changes rather than combating or like protecting the land or creating barriers or prolonging the sort of the changes that may happen.
I think if you have done the study, it'll be helpful to list them as the solution and why you rule it out. So you've done a study, so how much soil you need for maybe stuffing the whole country up by 1 meter, and you're saying this much soil will kind of destabilize the coastal area, so it's not feasible. And you have, if you include that as part of the study, then it will add on more. Yeah, because you have already done the work, so present it.
Where did you get the soil from? Just out of interest. Where are you gonna get the soil from? Do you know? Is it gonna be from the building? Like if you strip off, like, I don't know, like the ground floor of the building cladding, can you use the cladding to become almost like this soil? So I think, because what I'm interested is, because I think your project suddenly becomes very real, and I like the idea of Ellen's idea of this sort of feasibility study. So I think this, like, data and the numbers is really important for you to actually present to, you know, your audience, and to make it really plausible, because you're dealing with very real issues, and you're actually thinking about, you know, how you can address that. So in a way, I think even looking at the buildings, like where you said, okay, you're gonna, you know, put in this water tanks and everything. So what's the fabric of the building? You know, can you actually use the fabric of the building to become your soil, for example? So I mean, like, even when you, for example, this diagram here, you saw the frame structure, but is it really a frame structure in the actual city? Is it like a steel frame building, or is it going to be concrete?
No, so this is the proposed typology. So we are imagining it as a structural, like something that is based off of scaffolding. So yeah, steel.
Mm-hmm. So are you knocking down existing building or not?
So there were two approaches that could have been taken in this research or feasibility report that we did. Was either we sort of see how the existing building can change, where the possibility of whatever is existing and the ground floor is as is moves to the roofscape. But having seen, but comparing the two approaches that one can take, well, in the new housing typology, that was sort of the chosen approach. What became possible was that not only the roofscapes became something that could be explored, but the entire typology was something that became a potential of how can the new buildings come up, which can sort of interact with the changes that come in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking, maybe think about the materials as well. So if you were to lock down any existing buildings to build a new one, you know, can those materials become your, let's say, you know, this sort of landscape? So I think, you know, where do you actually get the materials can be quite interesting to think about, and it will help you enrich your project as well, because you can start to, you know, draw connections between resources, and then that will actually make your narrative much richer, and it becomes more, you know, believable as well, the scheme, because you're not constantly seeking new materials, because, you know, otherwise it would be so expensive. So how do you actually achieve that? So by actually arranging, you know, recycling the material from your, you know, existing conditions. Yeah.
Great job. Wonderful
result.
Wonderful result from workshop. 16 weeks, maybe. It's wonderful.
Almost
it's very long.
A great job. I think I want to arrange another call with you guys another time. We can talk about the project or other things, because we are running over time here. And yeah, I just want to congratulate you again. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to thank you all for the feedback. I know we have to rush, so I just want to thank you all for the feedback and the idea that you've given. It can certainly enhance the research that has come in. A lot of this, the credit goes to Paul and Clark, who've been patiently sort of also thought of extending the workshop with way more than the time it was, because it was a lot of fun. even if it was 16 weeks, it didn't feel like it was very fun to sort of keep extending the research and make it a lot more wholesome. So thank you, Paul and Clark.
Yeah, great.
No worries. We've just got to note that, yeah, there'll be one more final presentation in Jan. So there'll still be some time to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And before that, I think I want to arrange a call with you guys. We can talk about it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
We have
thank
to.
you.
Yeah. So.